This is the Rate of Rise series brought to you by Roast Magazine. Today we're talking with Scott Merle of Hacienda La Minita about what your broker wishes you knew. Well, hey everyone, this is Chris DeFurio with Keys to the Shop, and welcome to the Rate of Rise series where we have elevated conversations on roasting. This is brought to you by Roast Magazine, which is one of the longest running and most respected trade journals in the coffee industry. If you're a roaster or you're thinking about getting into roasting, you need to subscribe to Roast Magazine because it's there that you're going to learn about roasting from a technical perspective, all the latest research and knowledge and insights from scientists, subject matter experts, and professionals from across the industry. So go visit them at roastmagazine.com to subscribe today. There's a lot of other resources that Roast offers you on that website. Again, if you're a coffee roaster looking to improve your roasting and just be inspired as a professional, you definitely need to subscribe to Roast Magazine. All right, everybody. Well, today we are going to be talking about green coffee buying, in particular, what your broker wishes you knew. A perspective from that side of the relationship to help you become a great green buyer. The article that we're going to be discussing today was published last year in October 2020, and it is written by Scott Merle. Scott Merle is a senior vice president over at La Minita Coffee. Scott has worked in specialty coffee since 1988 and has experience in every aspect of the value chain from barista work to Roastmaster, and he has an extensive knowledge of green coffee sourcing, purchasing, roasting, blend development, and is proficient in many types of coffee evaluation. Scott has participated in multiple international cupping panels and was a founding member of the Executive Council for the SCAA's Roasters Guild. He serves on the Editorial Board for Roast Magazine and has served multiple committees and councils with the SCA, including 8 years on the SCAA Sustainability Council, where he spent a 3-year term as chair. Now, Scott has dedicated his career to furthering coffee quality throughout the value chain and has really exemplified and emphasized fair pricing practices to hardworking producers every step of the way. And today we get to tap into all that wisdom and knowledge that Scott has accumulated over the years to discuss further the topics brought up in this article related to being a responsible green coffee buyer. And what this really boils down to today are various aspects of how we need to tend to the relationship. And that's what it is, a relationship between a broker and a green buyer, and all the implications that has on both sides of the relationship. And so we go in depth on the various points made in the article, talking about communication, preparedness, coffee quality evaluation, invoicing, and just dealing with complexities that come up in the midst of the relationship, especially at origin. So I'm excited to have Scott on the show. I think you're going to get a ton from this. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with Scott Merle of La Minita Coffee. Hello, Scott. Welcome to Keys to the Shop. Really glad to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's always great to talk to somebody in the coffee industry who's been as involved as you have over the years. You have quite a history in coffee since 1988, holding various positions in the SCA and throughout the industry. And it's really interesting to have this kind of conversation around something that seems to be a perpetual conversation. The industry is always changing, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of that change over the course of your career. I wanted to ask about your own philosophy as it relates to green buying, but how it's been shaped by your experiences since you've seen such a large swath of the industry since 1988.
My philosophy is based on all of the experiences, good and bad, that I've been a part of over all the years. Where I've ended up now as a salesperson of green coffee and a broker who gets to work with roasters, I've been able to bring experiences of being a green buyer at a roasting company to this position. So I think my opportunities that I've had to work with producers at origin, to work with plenty of the middlemen, with exporters, with millers, and with importers, all have all contributed to kind of that overall picture of what all the participants have to offer, what all of their unique challenges are, and kind of how best to navigate and make it easy on each person within that chain to make kind of smooth and meaningful business relationships. We all learn from our mistakes. We learn from our successes. That's basically been the model for me. I try to pay attention to what other people are doing and watch what is successful for them and what mistakes are made, and how those mistakes either get fixed or avoided next time. So I try to be aware of everything that goes into these decisions and things that make companies successful or force them to struggle. I always feel like I'm ready to keep my eyes open and see what these issues are to make sure that I'm using all the information I can to make the best decisions I can.
So the idea of, staying in a place of learning is something I think we could all benefit from. It's also, I think, maybe true that the culture in which you kind of cut your teeth and the norms and status quo around you determine what kind of mistakes you would make and the kinds of possibilities you see for yourself in terms of making progress in the industry. So in your time in coffee, how has green buying and the relationship between roasters and brokers really shifted or changed? Because someone like myself, I have only been in coffee for 22 years, and that seems like a lot. I say only, but you've been in it a lot longer. I do see some changes myself, but you've been so deep into it. It seems like there's been some pretty good shifts in how these things go down. So I'm curious about what you've seen.
Well, it's interesting because it's basically the same business. It's the same industry. Things are based on quality and trust and communication and honesty. Thinking specifically about relationships between roasters and brokers is an interesting question too. And if I think about this, I think back so long ago in the 80s and 90s, it seems like importing companies and people that worked for, brokers and that had access to all the coffees were sort of considered the kind of mysterious, the phrase rock star gets knocked around a lot. They weren't ever really considered rock stars, but they were the ones with the information, right? They were the ones who had the contacts at origin. They were the ones who could get the information for roasters, and roasters were the ones who communicated with the brokers and said, please, will you help me? What's good and what should I be thinking about? And the brokers were there to provide that guidance and that expertise and that knowledge to them. Things, if you fast forward to now, it's really like consumers aren't really aware of the roles of importers or how connected people in the middle of the chain are, the whole value chain of coffee. And it's more, roasters, buyers, people who have great Instagram stories to sell their roasted coffee are the ones that have all the information and the answers, and the ones who are providing all of this information to end consumers. That's not really the relationship between the two, but that's just an interesting way that you can look at how the roles have maybe changed and shifted a little bit.
Is this something that impacts how healthy relationships are between green buyers and brokers? Because so many green buyers are, they work at roasteries and they're employed by roasters, and there's obviously a lot more communication these days, or maybe, especially in the age of transparency reports and other types of things. Has that shift made it better for these relationships, or is it just different?
I guess it's better. I mean, anytime there's more information and there's more ability to communicate more information and convey more information and to help share knowledge in a broader way, I'm convinced that that's a good thing, right? More people having more information is a good thing. So it's a positive.
Well, so now we have all this information at our disposal. If you're a person working in a roastery as a green buyer, there is a whole world of possibilities for you to select coffees from, and the ethics of today are so centered on sustainability and relationship coffees, but also making sure that you're making decisions that make good business sense. So keeping up your values while also making sure that you're keeping the doors open and also having this mutuality between you and the people you're working with. And as we're talking about this topic related to the article that you wrote for Roast, one of the main through lines of all of it is communication. I'm interested in knowing why communication is so important and what the main points of communication are that have to be maintained if you're a green buyer. And I kind of want to ask this from the perspective of somebody who says, okay, yes, I know, well, communication is important. Everybody kind of thinks about this at some level, but practically speaking, like, where do I start applying communication in my role as a green buyer so that I can maintain a good relationship with brokers? So first, I guess, why is it so important? Then, it's the how. Like, what do I do with that information of its importance?
Sure. Communication is it's just going to be the ability of people to have interactions with people that they're doing the business with. So having open lines of communication is important, and then understanding what it is that's important to share is important too. And along with just the communication piece, it's mostly honesty and realism that play the main parts in what makes the communication so important. So, not over promising purchases or not overestimating things that you think are going to benefit, how you appear to someone who you say you want to do business with, but being able to, follow through with the things that you say you're going to do. And any of those opportunities are opportunities to build trust, with the people that you're doing business with, and to make people rely on you and know that they can count on you to keep your word, and know that you're going to be a good participant in the value chain, whether you're selling something or buying something, that you're going to be an honest broker in that value chain.
Yeah, well, I imagine honesty is very important, and in the temptation to inflate your ability probably is a huge thing, because you maybe feel insecure in your position, first of all, and second of all, it just is like industry pressure. You want to make the sale, or you want to, whatever your reasoning is. I mean, it might seem innocent enough, and but I know that there's more to it, and there's more far-reaching implications of being a little less than honest, or a little less communicative, might actually have a lot of impact down the line. Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, and I don't know that it's so much trying to be deceitful about something, but when you travel to Origin, you meet a new producer group, or you spend time at a cooperative, your feeling is, if you like these people and you like the coffee, that you want to tell them that you're going to be able to buy as much as you can. And that can be a dangerous position to put yourself in if you're not actually going to physically be able to, come through with the purchase like that. People can take you at your word, and even something said, at a meeting or a big kind of community meal or something could be taken as a promise by certain people. So it's important to be realistic about that sort of stuff, and to be careful about what it is you're promising or saying you can deliver on.
What we're getting at here is that communication is great. I mean, you can communicate. It doesn't mean that it's good content. You could speak something and it can make no sense, and you can get yourself in trouble, just like you're saying, out of some notion to respond in the moment. So that self-control that you have to have seems like it would be born from doing the work already back at home in your office or with your team, to know what you're capable of saying and then what you're going to say, like game planning it already, due diligence and all that.
Sure. Good preparation is important for any any role, any job, any position that you're trying to do. So having a firm grasp on what your needs are, what your limitations are, is super important. Those can be a little bit of gray lines too when you are talking about what coffees that you want to buy. As a coffee buyer, you have opportunities to buy things that are super unique and expensive and for use in small places, small, limited time offerings or something. And at the same time, you have opportunities to buy, bigger volumes of coffees that will go into blends or be dark roasted or maybe flavored. You understand that you always have the kind of flexibility to move coffees that you're considering buying from one category to the other, or there are ways that you can kind of massage what those things are. I mean, you don't always have to follow like a game plan to the T. So having a plan, having an idea of how all those things will kind of fit together is important, and that can help you stay out of trouble when it comes to over promising a purchase or something.
It feels like when you learn to parallel park, you've got to learn the dimensions of your vehicle in order not to hit someone.
Yeah, and then the longer you have your car, the faster you can parallel park it. So it's the same thing. When you travel to origin after you've been doing it for 3 or 5 or 10 years, and you know that there are certain coffees that you're going to want to have in your inventory for certain uses, but you know that certain other coffees can be easily moved into other categories, then it's a lot easier for you to understand kind of what your limitations are, and you can just kind of shuffle all those coffees on the board until they fit. You end up not making promises that you can't keep, I guess, when you have a longer history of experience on how you can use all those things.
Yeah, it feels like if you're not confident in what you're saying, you could easily default towards generosity. And, it's better to just, like you say, you're not over-promising. You're maybe thinking, oh, man, I'm coming off like I'm really playing coy, or I feel uncomfortable in this, but I know it's right not to offer something at this moment because I couldn't make it an absolute yes, but I really want to. But my preparation and the knowledge of what I'm capable of is keeping me from doing that.
Yeah, that's 100% right. I think the way that you phrase that is correct too. The default to generosity, and that's basically what I intended to when I said a little bit earlier. It's easy to travel to a place and want to buy everything you see. If there are elements of the coffee and the people that you like, but that you probably can't. There are those limitations you have to live within. So there is certainly that default to generosity, which it's just something to be aware of. I guess it's not really a danger. I mean, it's a good thing that we kind of can default to that, but understanding how the other party might take some of your promises is important to keep in mind too.
Now that we know that this is a relationship that needs tending to, needs preparation, thoughtfulness, intentionality, and all of that, decisions need to be made at a certain point, right? So one of the things that you highlight in the article, you talk about decisions based on quality assessment, which is how most of us would imagine making decisions. How do you suggest a grain buyer conducts their quality control in order to make the best choices and not make, needless mistakes or, just fall into common pitfalls with these decisions? Sometimes, like in the article, it talks about, you could come off as, making decisions based on trying to prove yourself as a taster and other things, but not making good decisions for the relationship or even for the coffee itself. Talk to us a little bit about QC and best practices for grain buyers.
Well, that's a loaded question. So that's all going to depend on the size of your operation, what you're capable of doing, how qualified you are really to make evaluations, how good your sample roaster is, how much you trust or maybe don't trust some of the people who are sending you green samples to base decisions on. Every company has the opportunity and probably the responsibility to set up their own program for QC. And that's going to be different if you're roasting on a 3 kilo shop roaster, or if you're roasting on, big 4-bag machines. You're going to have different capabilities of like how closely you can evaluate some of those coffees, or how many coffees you have to actually make decisions about. And, there are a billion articles out there and classes that people can take to help set those kind of quality control parameters up. Any broker is going to be willing to work with a roaster on how best they can relate to what a roaster's quality control requirements are. So you may work with a small roaster that doesn't have a sample roaster, but maybe they want to see a couple of different samples of a coffee from a particular country or origin or region. We can provide some roasted samples to them, in those cases, as opposed to like green samples. So that roaster isn't doing full, green physical analysis and sensory evaluation, but they're still able to do some kind of, quality control, and the decision's still in their hands on which coffee it is they want to pick. So it's just the sky's the limit basically on what some of those parameters are. But working with the broker is really a good first step on how best they can help you, and provide you with the proper thing for you to make the right decision.
When you're relying on a broker, you're going to have to know exactly kind of some things that you're looking for. You have to come prepared with some guidelines in terms of, we're looking for this kind of flavor, or this type of, these origins, because we have a blend or we have a seasonal that people expect from us. But then also being open to, if you're working with them, having them give you suggestions that may be in line with that and maybe almost a little outside the box, but still surprise you. It sounds like it's a two-way street. And so I guess the question is, how much should we rely on the broker to do this kind of QC work for us versus having super stringent standards for what we get from them?
That's a good and kind of loaded question too. So the answer is that being as open and willing to share your needs and the reasons for those needs with your broker is going to get you probably the best results from them. So, and it can save you a lot of time. So if you think that maybe you only use a Colombian coffee for a certain type of blend or a certain type of roast, and because that's historically what you've done, and you go online and you look at offer sheets and you decide to ask for certain samples of just these certain Colombian coffees, you really are kind of immediately limiting yourself from the rest of the world of coffees. And your broker could be someone who has an idea of what other coffees could, perform the same sort of way, that maybe aren't from Colombia, that maybe are from a different place, that maybe have a little bit different cup profile. They may be an improvement to the Colombian that you've always used. The price is probably going to be different. So being open and willing to share that information can be super helpful. I know as a broker, it can be much more difficult for me to send, a complete offer sheet, have no idea what a customer is actually asking me for beyond just wanting to know like everything that we have and what all the prices are. So it's good to have some actual communication about that. I mean, that can be over email, it can be over a phone call, but actual conversation about what it is you're looking for and how a coffee fits is a good place to start.
I feel like the industry is divided between roasters who rely heavily on the QC of a broker and almost are educated on QC by the broker, and then roasters who are so fit out and built up with their own QC, like sometimes even dwarfing the QC of the broker, depending on how much money they've poured into it. How do you, for the first example, I mean, and maybe for both, how do you get to know what it is that they are capable of? And for the people that don't know exactly as much about QC, it seems like it would be a little bit of a journey of self-discovery. because like you were just talking about how you would send an offer sheet to somebody, and they might just be a little bit too open, and they don't know enough about their own offerings to have much of an opinion. They have some general guidelines. Which one is easier to work with? Somebody who has that super calibrated, fit out quality control lab, or the one who's really open to getting suggestions from you, but you also have to kind of hold their hand a little bit more?
I think they can both be as easy to work with as the other. I think that there are going to be other limiting factors to what's going to make each of those categories more difficult to work with, like not being upfront about what a coffee is going to be used for, or not allowing for the fact that, oh, I really do have a price limit on this kind of coffee. Nobody tells you right away usually that they have a price limit, but when you make an offer of 4 different suggestions, and you tell them these are all like $3.90, and they're like, whoa. So being open about those can be helpful for sure. But neither one is more difficult to work with. We perform all of our own quality control, quality assurance, quality evaluation. And if a roaster is comfortable on their own sample roaster, if they're comfortable with their own, method of evaluation, and they want to make up their own minds, then hey, more power to them. That result is, it's their decision. It's up to them, what's going to fit their machine better and their customer base better. So that's all fine. It's been interesting that one of the changes that we've seen in the last, 15 years or so, as we've been able to kind of improve our websites, and offer sheets have gone from things that, get faxed to a coffee roasting office versus, just online, here are my lists, and you can sort by warehouse and origin and certification and all those kinds of things. As we've been able to attach more information to each like specific coffee that we buy, I think people have become a little spoiled maybe on how much information there is. So if maybe there aren't prices on an offer sheet, maybe there are actually, cup scores or cup notes. And we get asked for that kind of stuff a lot, even when people are just looking for samples or looking for, ideas about coffee. They may ask us right away, like, what are the cup scores? And I would say maybe 15 years ago, people didn't ask that question. People said, send me a sample. I'll make my own mind up about what I think this cup score is. So there can be a good amount of reliance on a broker and their lab results to help inform people's decisions about what coffees they either want to sample or kind of narrow down in order to decide what's going to be best for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we do that evaluation as a rule on every arrival, right? Not to mention every pre-shipment sample. So we have a long history, as every broker does, of the quality of that coffee and how it performs. So we can be great, time savers when it comes to a roaster or a green buyer with a particular need for a particular type of coffee. We should have all that stuff on the top of our head, be able to narrow that list down quite a bit right off the bat.
When people are asking you a lot of different questions now versus, a while ago, regarding the coffee, about elevation and cup scores and things like that, do you view that as a positive thing, or is that something that you've seen maybe causes people to start to doubt their own abilities to taste coffee and just kind of overly rely on the information?
I don't know that it causes people to doubt their abilities. I think that so here's a generalization. My experience with people who are green coffee buyers, they don't usually hesitate to be confident in their ability to make up their mind, right? So I don't think that I've ever felt like providing people with our own cup notes has muddied the waters for them. Maybe it has, but they haven't shared that with me. People don't lack that confidence in themselves to make up their own minds about those things.
What do you think is reasonable for people to expect in terms of differences between your assessments and theirs? Because you're not going to roast on every type of roaster, and people's how they're going to sample roast the coffee is going to be different than yours, and there's going to be some kind of a gap there. How is that managed?
Just through experience. I mean, through our own, team's experience using different types of equipment, roasting coffees to different roast levels, to understand what certain particular, origin of coffee can do at light roast, medium roast, dark roast, what different processing methods, what kind of impact certain roast development levels will have on different processing methods. It just all adds up to experience. And then there's another communication piece. So it used to be when we would travel to visit clients, we could, do a cupping in their office and share our own experiences cupping the same exact coffees that our customers are cupping, tasting them the same way. And whenever I lead cupping classes, the one piece of information I want people to understand is that they're really not going to get better at cupping until they cup with more people and more people and more people and more people, so that they have exposure to different palates, different experiences, different perspectives. And it can really help people build their ability to not only be confident in what they're tasting and how their evaluation works, but to have a broader understanding of what other people perceive as certain qualities in a cup of coffee.
And as you go, you bank all of that knowledge, so you develop a confidence based on that experience that allows you to make those decisions quicker.
Yeah, I use the term library instead of bank, but it's the same exact thing. Yep. You the more you cup with other people, the more you hear their descriptions of what it is you're tasting, and you can decide for yourself whether you apply some of those same adjectives or descriptors to the coffee that you're tasting. Is up to you, but you at least have that in your library as a piece of reference, right? And the more information you have, the better you'll be able to kind of put those snapshots together when you taste coffees that are similar in the future.
So now that you've made a decision as a green buyer, you've got the coffee and everything's great, but one of the things in this article is your bills, your invoices, and that little piece of it, sometimes handled by the administrator of a roaster, sometimes the green buyer does it all. But it is a problem in a lot of roasteries, late invoice payments in particular, and just staying on top of your bills as a practice sounds like a real drudgery. Like the really romantic stuff was cupping the coffee and sourcing and going through those offer sheets and stuff. But now people got to get paid, right? So talk a little bit about why this is a problem and what kind of impact does it have on the rest of the industry when this happens?
Yeah, the two themes that came back from all of the people that I talked to for this article were we wish that people knew how complicated things are with the producer and how many other coffees they have besides just the super fancy ones. And boy, it sure would be nice if people paid their bills on time, or they should at least realize that when they don't pay their bills on time, next time their coffee is going to cost more. So that second sentiment was one that I heard, universally from everyone. So, just like anything else, it's important to stay on the good side of your suppliers, and it's important to be a good customer when it comes time to pay your bills. This is another place where being realistic is important. So don't take too much coffee at once that you can't, turn into money yourself and pay for your green inventory. Don't take a container of coffee if it's going to last you the whole year. We can build pricing in to cover storage and financing of a coffee, but that's going to rely on you taking it, on time. And if you're not going to be able to do that on time, then communicating that with your broker is important too, so that we can make different arrangements, or, instead of being ghosted when an invoice gets sent out, we can have a constructive conversation about, okay, we'll adjust the release schedule, or we'll maybe have to add some of this financing, or we'll do whatever we can to make the relationship kind of work out and adjust it, according to what the situation is. It's interesting, in the last 2 years with the pandemic stuff that's happened, there have been, situations that have been completely unexperienced, in the past, when it has come time to, whole roasting companies, cafes closed down for months, and roasting companies, slowed down their business a lot. So we had a lot of adjusting to do with our customers, as the whole country did, right? So coffee roasters were sitting on inventory. They were taking it a lot more slowly. And, our best relationships were ones where we had open and honest conversations with our customers about when they could take these coffees, how far out they would have to push, future deliveries, and being prepared for that, and being willing to work with your partner to kind of work through a complicated situation like this. It's always better, to start from a place of communication and honesty than it is to, simply either be, embarrassed about saying you can't take your coffee right away, or skipping a payment or something like that. It's always better to try to have these conversations and work out something that's gonna be fine for all parties.
You say embarrassed, and I wonder, why would somebody be embarrassed? And then, is this a thing where people might just imagine that there is no flexibility when working with a broker? They don't imagine that they can work, like you as a broker could work with them, and so they just assume, and they ghost you, and they don't want to deal with it because they just imagine, they catastrophize the situation a little bit too much.
Maybe, yeah. I would say embarrassed just because nobody really wants to admit that business is not as good as they hoped it would be. I think it's in everyone's interest to work on the assumption that things are good and rosy and business is booming all the time. I know that the last 2 years have put particular strain on all of the industries that our industry touches too. But I still think that there can be an element of that embarrassment, or unwillingness to admit that things are going maybe worse or slower than they'd hoped or promised in the past. Maybe that's the issue, is that because they'd made a deal, or kind of they're given their word about how they could take coffee, that maybe if they have to go back on that, it causes some stress to them.
Sure. And, you have to be able to hedge your bets also a little bit as brokers. Like you mentioned early in this answer to this question about how coffee would cost more the next time. I wonder if you could elaborate on that, and as to how that happens, or why that's a necessity when confronted with people who are paying their bills late, especially those who are kind of chronically so.
Sure. Anytime we sell coffee or write a contract for coffee, it's based on the quality of coffee, the volume of coffee, and then the delivery conditions. So what warehouse it's going to go into, and whether it's going to be taken right away, like as a spot sale, or whether it's going to be taken 10 bags a month for 4 months, over that course of time. And we have to plan for all those different things. We have to get that coffee into either maybe a different warehouse, or landed in the correct warehouse. And we have to plan for the financing of that coffee. So we have to pay for it, pay for it before it goes to the warehouse. We have to pay for it at origin. And especially now, where we're 12 months removed from some of the lows that we've seen in the coffee, commodity price world. And we're at 230, whatever, 235 now today. Coffee costs more than twice as much as it did a year ago. And so the financing necessarily has a bigger burden on the people that have to finance it. So if a roaster wants to buy a coffee, and we're faced with having to make calculations about about how to price those coffees, we have to figure that stuff in, whether they're going to pay on time, whether they're going to be 30 days late or 60 days late, or whatever their track record says. And then also take into consideration the increased costs that we have with just, financing because of the price and everything else that goes into making a coffee price a price.
Right. So it's not, it's realistic. It's not punitive.
It's not punitive. It is realistic. So that's a fair way to put it. Basically, you can imagine that there is an opportunity to get like a discount if you buy more coffee at a time, which is true. I mean, it makes it easier on us if we can do a sale sooner for a bigger amount, and so there's less of a kind of headache addition or something like that. I mean, I don't think that's punitive. It's just, the value of what it's worth to have a deal be done. So no, it's not. Some of those pricing things just take reality into account, because I know of very few brokers who are as stringent as all of the wording on our contracts say. Like anything that sits past the contracted period will incur whatever percent interest charge. Well, everybody's been in coffee long enough that they know that a lot of that stuff gets overlooked, and maybe I'll get people mad at me for saying this, but we don't always go, we're not a bunch of lawyers chasing people down for their 1% for taking 5 bags of coffee late, but we need that information on those contracts. So maybe adding something into a price later is something that can keep someone from being late, or help to make them realize how important it is to stay on time with some of that stuff.
It must be really easy for roasters and maybe green buyers to assume that these kinds of breaches of trust, and it sounds very heavy when I say breach of trust, but it's essentially what it is. You're not doing what you said you were going to do, but it's, you're a big company. You got lots of green coffee, lots of customers. You can handle it. You can just absorb all of these incongruities, right? And I feel like there is a little bit of that assumption going on where I've got bigger fish to fry in my small business. This big green coffee importer doesn't, they're not going to fold under the pressure of my late invoice. What would you say about that? Is that something that you see kind of as an assumption, and how does that play out when it comes to like the cumulative effect of a lot of people kind of having that assumption?
That they can be late and somebody else can absorb the costs?
That you'll be fine because you're a big company and they're just a small roaster, so it's okay.
I think that every business is different, and anyone that we sell coffee to, they have to turn around and roast their coffee and put it in their own bags and sell it to their customers. So I would ask the same question. I mean, what's the impact of a number of your customers paying you late, or not paying you at all, or paying you a little bit less, or saying that they'll pay you next week, or whatever? All of those additions, add up to things that can have a pretty significant impact on your bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So having kind of an outward mindset is helpful in a relationship. But empathetic relationships, we'll say, like looking at it from the perspective of the person you're in a relationship with, in this case, the broker, helps you, navigate things that happen in the midst of the relationship. And sometimes there are complexities beyond just the relationship itself, but the relationship between the broker and the farmer. There's a lot of complexities at origin. And you bring this up in the article towards the end where, there's stuff that you just have to roll with in at origin, because it's not always cut and dry. There's a lot of things that happen weather-wise, politically, and things like that. So what kind of unintended consequences does kind of a lack of mindfulness of these complexities have on the producer and the market?
I think the biggest one has to do with people's idea of quality and the meaning of quality within like a coffee buying relationship. a coffee harvest is different every year, and coffee buyers should understand that. But I think that it can be tricky to base decisions entirely on whether a coffee hits a certain score number in order for you to bring it in or buy it, on a repeated basis. If it's something that you say is a relationship, or that's a meaningful, part of your supply chain, or something that historically a producer you bought from before. I've seen that too many times, Chris, where people just say, this year I just didn't meet my quality standards, so I'm not buying it. And then that really can leave. I think people may not always understand how much of an impact a decision to not buy something can have on a producer, especially if it's a coffee that's special somehow, set aside for a roaster for a particular purchase, set aside for a relationship that's been in place for a couple of years or more. Those decisions can have huge impacts on a producer and that producer's income.
Yeah, it feels like there's a line between being pragmatic and being negligent in this way.
People talk about their relationships, and you have to take those seriously. I tend to be someone who would, let's say, default to generosity on that again, right? I think it's important to consider the fact that, coffee as an agricultural commodity can change over time, can change from year to year. I think that as a buyer, my mindset was one that some years the coffee quality was tip top, some years the quality was maybe a little bit subpar, but I felt it important in order to maintain, a good relationship with the producer, that we still had to buy those coffees, because we'd made a promise, or because we value the relationship, or because we don't want to miss out on the tip top years that are, coming ahead by maybe passing on a down year 1 year. So I do think that that's important. And I think that there are certainly buyers who are cognizant of that and keep their word like that. But there are also companies that can skip on purchases for that reason, and that can be detrimental to a relationship.
Well, in this case, it feels like defaulting towards generosity is, as you just described, some of the positive business implications of doing that can be good for business. And maybe we expand our idea of what quality control is to also the quality of the relationship as a boon for business, not just in the immediate, but like you say, something down the line that will yield more fruit than simply the immediate transaction. Sure.
And you brought up sustainability earlier, and just to toss that word back in, it's like, yeah, what's the goal here? If the goal here is to help these producers be able to, produce a crop of coffee again next year, then it's in all of our best interest to make sure that the coffee gets paid for this year. Whether it scores an 85 or an 87 shouldn't really matter that much. I mean, the coffee should still be bought, it should still find its way into the market. And if it's an important relationship to you as a roaster or a green buyer, then you should find a way to use that coffee and get through this rough year and look forward to better years in the future.
And to go back to your library analogy, like the more experience you have and the more you get to know the dimensions of this vehicle of green buying, et cetera, I find that the people who are the most mature and that have the most perspective and wisdom in their roles have more flexibility in these types of decisions. There's less rigidity as they go on because they understand the longer term, the 30,000 foot view, not just what's in front of the face.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, you could probably say that about any industry too, yeah. Right? So the more experience you have, the more ability you have to be flexible. And, we all make mistakes. We all overbuy things, or we all wish we would have bought more of the great thing that we maybe missed out on. But basically that's how you learn too. I mean, I used to say that making a bad decision about a coffee or buying a coffee I wish I hadn't bought was like getting a bad haircut. I mean, you'll have a chance in in 4 weeks at another one. So, just having a short memory like a quarterback that throws an interception, you just have to use the information that comes to you in the best way you can, and try to make another great decision for the betterment of your company.
Excellent. This has really been a fun conversation, and I think that there's so much that anyone who is contemplating, having this be their profession or is currently doing this right now, absolutely, they should read the article first of all. And I think you've helped enormously through sharing all of this in today's talk. How can we stay in touch with you and what you're doing in the world of coffee?
You can visit our website. That's just laminita.com. Learn about our origin operations in Costa Rica and Colombia, and see what coffees we have on offer currently in the United States. Happy to talk to people. We're always happy to work with whatever quality control requirements you have. And we're happy to talk on the phone or over email about what particularly any roaster is looking for.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Scott, for joining us.
Sure. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. A lot of the stuff that Scott is talking about here deals with just being mindful of the kind of impact that our actions and our inactions have on the value chain and the people that we're in relationship with. I feel like boiling it down to the spirit of mutuality, planning well, keeping your promises, communicating, all of that, it's so integral to having a good relationship that brings a consistency to the industry and a lot of good faith as well. So there's so much to digest in this episode, and a huge thank you to Scott Merle for joining us on the show. Again, you can find out more information about what Scott is doing there at La Minita by visiting their website over at laminita.com. That's laminita.com. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about this episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to email me. chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can reach me. And don't forget to subscribe to Roast Magazine. Check them out over at roastmagazine.com. And this is the last Rate of Rise episode for 2021. I hope that you all have really enjoyed these and it has helped you in your career as a roaster. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.